My beloved child. Before this moment reached you, a conversation unfolded where your name entered the room without warning. It wasn't planned. It wasn't rehearsed. It happened because someone could no longer carry certain feelings in silence. They tried to speak casually at first, as though your presence in their heart was nothing unusual, but every sentence revealed more than they intended. The person listening noticed it immediately. They saw a softness in those words that even the speaker could not hide. And what was said next changed the direction of that conversation in a way neither of them expected. Imagine how strange it feels when someone asks a simple question, yet your entire heart answers instead of your mind. That is what happened. They were asked, "Why do you keep thinking about this person?" For a brief moment, they smiled without realizing it. Then the smile disappeared, replaced by the kind of silence that speaks louder than explanations. They searched for the perfect answer, but emotions are rarely fluent. Sometimes the deepest truth arrives wrapped in hesitation. The one sitting across from them waited patiently. There was no pressure, only quiet curiosity. Finally, they admitted something they had been afraid to say aloud. They confessed that whenever life became overwhelming, your memory somehow brought peace they couldn't explain. Not because everything between you was perfect, but because something about your spirit reminded them that kindness still exists in a complicated world. Yet even after saying that much, they stopped themselves. There was another thought pressing against their heart, one they almost refused to reveal. They wondered if speaking it would make them appear vulnerable. Have you ever held back words simply because once they leave your lips, they can never return? That was the place they found themselves standing. Their friend noticed the unfinished sentence. Gently, they asked, "Is there something you're still not saying?" Another pause. Another deep breath. And then came a confession so honest it surprised even the person speaking. "I keep pretending I'm fine without them." The room grew quieter than before. Not because the statement solved anything, but because it exposed everything. Sometimes the strongest walls are built around the gentlest hearts. From the outside, people appear confident, busy, distracted. Yet behind closed doors, they replay conversations, remember laughter, and wonder whether someone else is thinking about them at the exact same moment. Your name had become one of those quiet thoughts they carried far more often than anyone realized. Their friend looked at them carefully and asked another unexpected question. "If they knew how much space they still occupy in your heart, would you want them to know?" The answer did not come immediately. Instead, they looked away. That single movement revealed more than words ever could. Because the truth wasn't simply about missing someone. It was about fearing what honesty might change. They worried that opening their heart could invite disappointment. Or perhaps reveal hope they had worked so hard to hide. Life has a curious way of placing people at the edge of transformation long before they recognize it. We often believe our greatest battles happen in public, but many are fought quietly inside ordinary conversations where only two people are present. One sentence can become the beginning of healing. One honest admission can loosen years of guarded emotions. As their conversation continued, something unexpected happened. Their friend smiled. Not the smile of someone amused. The smile of someone who had quietly understood the situation long before a single confession was made. "You still care," they said gently. Those three simple words settled into the silence like light entering a dark room. There was no argument. No denial. Only another long pause that carried its own answer. Sometimes acceptance arrives without a speech. Sometimes it arrives through tears that never fall. And sometimes it arrives through the realization that love cannot always be measured by how often someone speaks, but by how deeply their heart continues to remember. Yet this conversation was not finished. Because after admitting what they felt, they revealed something even more surprising. They confessed that recently they had noticed little reminders appearing everywhere. A familiar song playing unexpectedly. A place that suddenly reminded them of you. A random moment when they almost reached for their phone before stopping themselves. They couldn't explain why these moments kept happening, but each one quietly pointed back to the same person. You. Their friend listened carefully before asking one final question. What are you actually afraid of? This time the answer arrived almost instantly. I'm afraid that after all this time, they may have stopped believing I ever cared. Those words lingered in the air. Not because they were dramatic. Because they were painfully sincere. Many hearts carry feelings that never become conversations. They wait for certainty before speaking, while certainty waits for someone brave enough to begin. And in that quiet tension, days become weeks, weeks become months, and countless beautiful possibilities remain unopened. But this story did not end with fear. Something happened immediately afterward that neither of them anticipated. A message appeared. Not from the friend. Not from a stranger. From someone connected to a memory they thought had already faded. The moment they saw the name on the screen, every emotion they had struggled to hide suddenly returned with unexpected clarity. They stared at those few words in complete silence. And what they chose to do next would reveal the one truth they had been protecting from everyone, including themselves. The screen remained still, yet everything inside them shifted. They read the message once. Then again. Not because the words were difficult to understand, but because they awakened feelings that had been sleeping beneath countless ordinary days. The friend sitting across from them noticed the change immediately. "What is it?" they asked softly. For several seconds, there was no reply. Only a slow breath, and eyes fixed on a memory that suddenly felt alive again. The message itself was simple. It did not contain dramatic declarations or impossible promises. Instead, it carried something far more powerful. It reminded them of a moment they had shared with you, a conversation they once believed you had forgotten. A small kindness. A sentence of encouragement. A laugh that arrived at exactly the right time. Isn't it remarkable how the moments we think are insignificant often become the ones another heart treasures most? Without realizing it, you had left an imprint that time never erased. Their friend leaned forward. "I've never seen you react like this." This time, they didn't deny it. Instead, they whispered something they had never admitted aloud. "I thought I had moved on, but maybe I've only been moving around the feelings." The room fell quiet once more. Not with awkwardness. With understanding. There is a difference between forgetting someone and learning how to live with their absence. Many people confuse the two. They had. Until now. As they held the phone in their hand, another realization quietly surfaced. They weren't only remembering who you had been. They were beginning to recognize who you had helped them become. Some people enter our lives like fireworks, bright, loud, unforgettable for a moment. Others arrive like sunrise. Gentle. Steady. Almost unnoticed. Until one day you realize you cannot imagine the world without their light. You had become that kind of memory. The friend smiled again, though this time there was a thoughtful sadness behind it. "You always speak about them differently." "What do you mean?" "You never describe what they gave you." A pause. "You describe who you became whenever they were near." Those words landed deeper than either of them expected. Because suddenly the conversation was no longer about missing someone. It became about recognizing a part of themselves that only seemed to awaken in your presence. They closed their eyes for a moment. Fragments returned. The way you listened without rushing. The way you noticed small details others overlooked. The quiet encouragement you offered without expecting anything in return. The moments when silence between you never felt empty. Those memories were not grand spectacles. They were ordinary. And perhaps that is why they became extraordinary. Life rarely changes through one unforgettable event. More often, it changes through hundreds of gentle moments we only appreciate after they've passed. Their friend finally asked the question that had been waiting patiently beneath everything else. If you had one chance to tell them the truth, what would you say? This time, there was no hesitation. They looked toward the window, where evening light stretched across the room, and answered with remarkable honesty. I'd tell them. The words stopped. Emotion interrupted the sentence before it could finish. Not because they lacked courage. Because some truths are so precious they resist becoming ordinary speech. After gathering themselves, they continued. I'd tell them that I still wonder how they're doing, more often than anyone knows. Another quiet breath. I'd tell them I still hope they're smiling. And I'd tell them I'm grateful. The friend blinked. Grateful? Yes. For reminding me that kindness is stronger than pride. For showing me patience without asking for perfection. For teaching me that genuine connection doesn't disappear simply because life becomes complicated. Gratitude has a remarkable way of revealing love in places where pride once stood. And that was exactly what was happening. Without planning to. Without intending to. Their heart was telling the whole story. But something still remained hidden. There was one memory they had carefully protected from everyone. Not because it was painful. Because it was sacred. It was the final conversation they had replayed countless times, searching for clues they might have missed. A single sentence from you had echoed through their thoughts ever since. At first, they believed it was simply a kind remark. Months later, it began to sound like something much deeper. Their friend noticed them drifting into thought again. What are you remembering? They smiled faintly. The last thing they said before we went our separate ways. And? I didn't understand it back then. A gentle silence followed. But now? They looked down at the phone still resting in their hand. I think they were trying to give me hope before either of us knew we would need it. For the first time that day, tears filled their eyes, not from regret, but from gratitude for something they almost failed to recognize. Sometimes we spend years searching for signs, only to discover they were quietly placed in our path long ago. Yet just as peace began settling over the conversation, the phone vibrated again. A second message. Different sender. Different words. But somehow connected to everything that had just been revealed. They opened it slowly. The moment they reached the final line, their expression changed completely. Even their friend whispered. What did you just read? They couldn't answer. Because the message contained one unexpected question. A question that pointed directly back to you. And answering it would require a decision they could no longer postpone. The question lingered on the screen like a door waiting to be opened. It was not demanding. It was not dramatic. Yet it carried a quiet weight that settled deep within their heart. It simply asked. If the opportunity came, would you finally tell them the truth? No one in the room spoke. Even their friend seemed to understand that this was no longer an ordinary conversation. Some questions do not ask for information. They ask for courage. They looked at the message again, searching for an easier answer. Surely there had to be one. Surely there was a way to protect their heart without risking disappointment. But every path they imagined led back to the same place. Your name. The friend finally broke the silence. You've spent so much time wondering what they might say. They nodded. But you've almost never asked yourself what you would say. That realization landed with unexpected force. For months, perhaps even longer, they had been waiting for perfect timing. Waiting for certainty. Waiting for unmistakable signs. Yet while they waited, life quietly continued moving forward. The seasons changed. New routines formed. The world kept turning. But one feeling refused to fade. It wasn't loud anymore. It wasn't desperate. It had become something quieter. Something steadier. Like a candle that keeps burning long after the storm has passed. They rested the phone on the table and leaned back. "I've been afraid." The words came without resistance this time. Afraid that if I opened my heart, I'd discover I was the only one still holding on. Their friend listened carefully before answering. "That fear is more common than you think. We all worry about being the one who remembers more." The sentence hung in the air. How many people carry love disguised as silence? How many smiles hide unanswered questions? How many stories remain unfinished simply because two hearts are each waiting for the other to move first? They thought about every excuse they had made. It's too late. They've probably forgotten. They're happier without me. Each excuse had felt convincing. Until they spoke it aloud. Sometimes the stories we tell ourselves sound true only because we've repeated them so many times. The friend reached into a drawer and pulled out something unexpected. An old photograph. Its edges were slightly worn. The colors had softened with time. "You left this here months ago," the friend said. "I meant to give it back." Their hands trembled as they accepted it. There you were. Not posing. Not trying to impress anyone. Simply laughing at something outside the frame. The kind of laugh that cannot be rehearsed. The kind that escapes before the mind has time to hold it back. They smiled without realizing it. "You always laughed like the world still had reasons to hope." Their friend noticed. "See? What? You smiled before you even knew you were smiling." The photograph wasn't valuable because it captured your face. It was valuable because it reminded them of the version of themselves standing beside you. Someone lighter. Someone more patient. Someone who believed tomorrow could still surprise them. A quiet realization unfolded. Perhaps love isn't only about wanting another person's presence. Perhaps it's also about remembering who you become when kindness is shared freely. They traced the edge of the photograph with their thumb. Then they noticed something they had somehow overlooked every previous time. Written on the back. In handwriting they recognized immediately. Was a single sentence. "Some connections don't disappear, they simply wait for the right season." Their breath caught. When did they write this? The friend smiled. "The day that picture was taken. They handed it to me and asked me to keep it safe. They said one day you might need to read it." The room became impossibly still. Of all the things they expected to hear, this was not one of them. You had left behind more than a memory. You had left behind hope. Not loud hope. Not impatient hope. The quiet kind that survives even when no one notices it's still alive. They held the photograph close, wondering how many times they had convinced themselves the story was over. While a forgotten message had been waiting all along. Then another thought entered their mind. One they had avoided for far too long. What if they stopped? What if they've changed? The friend answered gently. People do change. So do hearts. But genuine kindness rarely becomes something unrecognizable. Those words settled like morning light after a long night. The future didn't need to resemble the past perfectly. It only needed honesty. For the first time in a long while, fear no longer occupied every corner of their heart. It was still there. But now it stood beside something stronger. Hope. Not certainty. Hope. And sometimes that is enough to take the first step. They slipped the photograph into their pocket. Picked up the phone. Opened your conversation. Their thumb hovered over the keyboard. One sentence. That was all it would take to begin. They typed. Paused. Erased every word. Started again. This time, they didn't try to sound impressive. They simply tried to sound true. Just as they were about to press send, a new notification appeared across the top of the screen. It wasn't from you. It was from someone who knew both of you. And the message contained a single line that made their heartbeat stop. There's something you deserve to know before you reach out. Everything changed in that instant. Because whatever came next would reveal that the story connecting your hearts had been unfolding in ways neither of you had ever imagined. The words on the screen refused to disappear. There's something you deserve to know before you reach out. Their finger froze above the message. A moment earlier, their heart had finally found enough courage to speak. Now, uncertainty quietly returned, not as panic, but as a whisper asking them to wait just a little longer. They opened the message. It wasn't long. There were no dramatic revelations. Only a few carefully chosen sentences from someone who had watched both of your journeys from a distance. I've stayed quiet because I believed this was something the two of you had to discover on your own. But after everything that's happened, I don't think silence is helping either of you anymore. They read those lines twice. Then a third time. Their friend leaned closer. What does it mean? With a thoughtful expression, they answered. I don't think this is about what happened between us. It's about what never happened. Those words carried a different kind of ache. Sometimes relationships are not broken by harsh words. Sometimes they slowly drift apart because important words are never spoken at all. The message continued. You both spent so much time trying to protect each other from disappointment, that neither of you realized you were protecting yourselves from happiness as well. The room fell silent. Not because anyone disagreed. Because the sentence felt painfully familiar. How often do people mistake distance for strength? How often do they believe silence is kindness, when in reality it leaves questions growing where peace could have lived? Their friend quietly smiled. I always wondered if that was true. You knew? I suspected. Every time your name came up, something changed in their eyes. And every time someone mentioned them to you, the same thing happened. Neither of you had hidden your feelings as well as you believed. The heart has a language all its own. It appears in unfinished sentences. In smiles that arrive unexpectedly. In names spoken a little more gently than the rest. In the way someone's eyes soften while remembering moments no one else noticed. As the conversation continued, another memory surfaced. Their friend remembered a gathering from months ago. Nothing extraordinary had happened. People laughed. Music played quietly in the background. Conversations drifted from one topic to another. But then someone casually mentioned your latest accomplishment. Without realizing it, they had stopped whatever they were doing. They listened to every detail. Not out of curiosity alone. But with unmistakable pride. Even then, they had tried to hide it. They simply nodded and changed the subject. Yet everyone who was paying attention had seen it. Sometimes love reveals itself most clearly in moments when no one believes they're being observed. Their friend laughed softly. You know what surprised me? What? You never spoke about what you wished they'd become. You always hoped they were becoming everything they dreamed of. There is a beautiful difference. Possession asks, will they choose me? Love quietly wonders, are they doing well? That realization settled gently into their heart. For so long, they had viewed their feelings as unfinished. Now they began to understand they had also been deeply grateful. Grateful that your path existed. Grateful that your kindness had crossed theirs. Grateful that, even after time had passed, your memory still encouraged them to become someone better. They looked down at the photograph again. The handwritten sentence on the back suddenly felt less like nostalgia. And more like an invitation. Some connections don't disappear, they simply wait for the right season. What if? They hesitated. What if this is that season? No one answered immediately. Certain questions deserve silence before they receive words. The friend finally stood and walked toward the window. Outside, the evening sky was changing. The last colors of daylight slowly welcomed the first stars. Look, the friend said. They don't replace each other. The light simply changes. Those words touched something deep inside. Perhaps that was true of people as well. Perhaps growth wasn't about becoming strangers to yesterday. Perhaps it was about carrying yesterday's lessons into tomorrow with greater wisdom. Their fear no longer felt like a locked door. It felt like the final step before crossing a bridge. Then something unexpected happened. The phone rang. Not a text. Not another notification. An actual call. They stared at the screen. Their breathing slowed. The name wasn't yours. It belonged to the same person who had sent the message moments earlier. With trembling hands, they answered. A warm voice greeted them. I hoped you'd pick up. I think it's finally time I told you something I've kept to myself. Their heart beat faster. What is it? The voice paused. You've spent all this time wondering whether they ever stopped caring. Another quiet breath. I can tell you this. There was one day, one conversation, that convinced me the story between you wasn't finished. The room seemed to stand still. What happened? They whispered. The answer came gently. It happened the day they thought no one was listening. The voice continued. They spoke about you with such sincerity that everyone in the room became quiet. Not because they were making promises, but because every word reflected respect, gratitude, and hope. Their eyes filled with emotion. They had imagined countless versions of the past. None of them looked like this. Yet before the caller could explain what had actually been said, the connection crackled. The voice faded. Then the call ended. No goodbye. No explanation. Only silence. They looked at the phone in disbelief. Somewhere beyond that interrupted conversation was the missing piece of the story, the very words spoken about you when they believed no one else would ever hear them. And discovering those words would change the way both of your hearts understood everything that came before. The silence after the call felt heavier than the conversation itself. They stared at the dark screen, almost expecting it to light up again. It didn't. For a few long moments, no one moved. Their friend finally spoke. Are you going to call back? They looked down at the phone, then slowly shook their head. No. Why not? Because. I don't think the answer is meant to be chased. I think it's meant to arrive. It was an unusual response, yet something about it felt right. Not every meaningful moment can be forced. Some truths reveal themselves only after the heart has become patient enough to receive them. They slipped the phone into their pocket and stood by the window. Outside, the evening breeze carried leaves across the quiet street. Nothing extraordinary was happening. Yet everything inside them felt different. The conversation from earlier had uncovered something they could no longer ignore. For so long, they had measured love by the words that were never spoken. Now they were beginning to notice the countless ways it had quietly been expressed all along. The friend walked over with 2 warm cups of tea and handed one to them. You've been asking the wrong question. They looked up. What do you mean? You've spent all this time asking whether they ever cared. A small pause. But maybe the better question is, why did they care so deeply? That question settled into the room with surprising gentleness. Why? What was it about you that remained in their heart long after ordinary memories had faded? They searched for an answer. At first, nothing came. Then, little moments began returning. Not dramatic memories. Simple ones. The afternoon you encouraged someone else instead of trying to be noticed yourself. The time you apologized first, even when your pride could have stayed silent. The quiet way you celebrated another person's success without making it about yourself. Your habit of remembering details that everyone else forgot. None of those moments seemed extraordinary when they happened. Yet together, they painted a picture of someone whose kindness had never asked for applause. Their friend smiled knowingly. You know what they once told me? They turned quickly. What? They said. Being around them makes me want to become a better version of myself. Those words lingered in the air. Not because they sounded poetic. Because they were honest. Perhaps the deepest form of affection is not found in constant excitement. Perhaps it is found in the quiet influence one soul has on another. The kind that gently changes your character without ever demanding credit. Their eyes filled with gratitude. Not because everything suddenly made sense. Because they were beginning to understand that your impact had reached places even you may never have realized. Then the friend remembered something else. I almost forgot. There was another part. What part? The conversation didn't end there. Their hearts skipped. What happened? The friend leaned back, searching through memory. Someone asked them. If you had the chance to describe this person in one sentence, what would you say? The room became impossibly still. They had never heard the answer. Until now. Slowly. Carefully. Their friend repeated the exact words. They said. They make ordinary days feel meaningful. No elaborate speech. No dramatic declaration. Just one sentence. Yet it carried more sincerity than 1,000 rehearsed compliments. Ordinary days. Not vacations. Not celebrations. Not unforgettable milestones. The everyday moments. Morning conversations. Shared laughter. Comfortable silence. Simple walks. Those were the memories they cherished most. Isn't that where lasting love often grows? Not in perfection. But in peaceful presence. Their heart felt strangely lighter. Years of uncertainty had convinced them they needed extraordinary proof. Instead, the greatest truth had been hidden inside the ordinary all along. Just then, the phone vibrated again. This time, it wasn't a call. It was a voice message. No name. Only an unfamiliar number. Their friend frowned. Are you going to play it? For a moment, they hesitated. Then they pressed play. The recording began with several seconds of silence. As if the person speaking had needed courage before saying a single word. Finally, a familiar voice emerged. Not yours. Not the friend's. The voice belonged to someone who had witnessed that unforgettable conversation months earlier. I've carried this for a long time, the recording began softly. I wasn't sure if I should ever tell you. Another pause. But after hearing everything that's happened, I believe you deserve to know. Their breathing slowed. The voice continued. The day they spoke about you. They weren't trying to convince anyone. They were trying to convince themselves that letting go was the right thing to do. A quiet ache filled the room. But something unexpected happened. The more they explained why they should move on, the clearer it became that their heart had never truly left. The recording stopped for a second. Then resumed. And there was one final sentence. A long breath. They looked at us. And said. If they're happy, I'll be grateful. If our paths cross again, I'll be thankful. And if neither happens, another pause. Then I'll still thank God for allowing our lives to meet at all. The recording ended. No music. No farewell. Only silence. Tears quietly filled their eyes. Not from sorrow. From the overwhelming realization that genuine affection had never been measured by possession. It had always been measured by gratitude. They looked once more at the unfinished message they had been writing to you. Their thumb hovered above the screen. This time, they didn't erase a single word. They took one slow breath, closed their eyes, and pressed send. The message disappeared. There was no way to call it back. No chance to rewrite it. Only the quiet hope that honesty had arrived at exactly the right moment. Then, just seconds later, 3 tiny dots appeared on the screen. Someone was already typing. And the very first words of that reply would reveal a truth neither of you had been brave enough to believe until now. Those 3 small dots appeared. Then vanished. Then appeared again. Each pause felt like a heartbeat suspended between yesterday and tomorrow. They didn't rush the moment. For so long they had hurried past their own emotions, searching for quick answers to questions that required patience. Now, all they could do was wait, not with fear, but with quiet hope. Their friend watched from across the room. They're thinking carefully. A gentle smile crossed their face. I hope so. No, the friend replied softly. I think they're choosing their words because some conversations deserve more than the first thing that comes to mind. That thought settled deeply. Perhaps the most meaningful replies are never the fastest ones. Finally, the message arrived. It wasn't long. In fact, it contained only one sentence. I've been hoping we'd find our way back to an honest conversation. They read it again. Not because they doubted it, but because they had imagined so many different responses over the years that this simple sentence felt almost impossible. There was no blame. No list of old misunderstandings. No attempt to reopen old wounds. Just an invitation. An invitation to honesty. Sometimes healing doesn't begin with answers. Sometimes it begins with permission. Permission to speak without pretending. Permission to listen without defending. Permission to meet each other where you truly are, instead of where fear convinced you to remain. Their hands trembled as they typed a reply. Then they stopped. Not because they had changed their mind. Because another realization quietly unfolded. This conversation didn't need perfect words. It only needed truthful ones. So they erased every carefully crafted sentence. They wrote something much simpler. Thank you for answering. Nothing more. Nothing less. A minute passed. Then another message arrived. There are things I've wanted to tell you for a long time. The friend looked over. What did they say? A quiet smile answered before words ever could. They're opening a door. The room no longer felt heavy. The uncertainty that had lived there all day was slowly giving way to something gentler. Not certainty. Trust. Trust that whatever came next could finally be built on honesty instead of assumptions. The conversation continued. Neither of you rushed. Each message carried the kind of care that only comes from people who understand the value of being heard. There were apologies that didn't ask to erase the past. There was gratitude for lessons learned during the time apart. There were memories that somehow made both of you laugh, even though they had once brought tears. And then, a message appeared that neither of you expected. Can I tell you something I've never told anyone? The answer came immediately. Of course. Several moments passed before the next message appeared. It seemed as though every word was being chosen with extraordinary care. Finally. The day I spoke about you to my friend. I wasn't actually talking about the past. They paused, reading it twice. I was talking about the future I quietly hoped might still be possible. Their breath caught. So many months had been spent believing those conversations belonged to yesterday. Yet all along, hope had been looking forward, not backward. They stepped outside for a moment. The evening air was calm. Above them, the first stars had begun to fill the sky. They remembered something someone once said. The brightest lights don't compete with the darkness. They simply shine. Perhaps hearts are the same. They don't become stronger by proving themselves. They become stronger by remaining open when life gives them another opportunity to love with greater wisdom. The phone vibrated once more. This message was different. There was no uncertainty in it. No hesitation. Just quiet sincerity. I don't know exactly where this road leads. But I know I'd regret never walking it with honesty. Those words carried no guarantees. And somehow, that made them even more beautiful. Because real hope is never built on certainty. It is built on willingness. A willingness to listen. To forgive. To grow. To begin again without pretending the journey never had difficult chapters. Their eyes filled with grateful tears. Not because every question had been answered. But because the silence that once separated two hearts had finally been replaced with truth. Yet before the night came to an end, one final message appeared. There's something I've kept since the day we last saw each other. Their curiosity awakened once more. A photograph? A letter? A forgotten gift? None of those. The next line changed everything. It's a promise I made to myself. Their heart raced. I promised that if life ever gave us another chance to truly talk, I wouldn't hide behind fear again. They looked up at the quiet sky. Some promises are spoken aloud. Others are carried silently for years, waiting for the right season to bloom. And in that peaceful moment, they realized something extraordinary. The greatest words spoken about you had never been the ones shared with friends. They were the ones quietly shaping someone's heart when no one else was around. But there was still one secret neither of you had uncovered. One small detail from your very first meeting. A detail so easily overlooked that it seemed meaningless at the time. Yet it would soon reveal why this connection had always felt different from every other. And once that forgotten moment returned to the light, both of you would understand that the story had been quietly unfolding from the very beginning.